It's Friday and time for our focus on one particular country and its campaign against COVID-19 and more. Now this week we turn to New Zealand, where Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has cancelled her wedding amid her government's efforts to stem the spread of Omicron. For more on the situation there, I have Professor Michael Baker at the University of Otago, who is also a member of the Ministry of Health's COVID-19 Technical Advisory Group. Professor Baker, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yes, well, greetings from New Zealand.
Right, Professor, let's begin then with the Omicron situation over in New Zealand, which appears to be in its early stages compared, of course, to the situation in other countries.
Yes, well, look, New Zealand's had a sequence of responses to COVID-19. We had an elimination approach for 18 months. Then from August last year, we had ongoing Delta variant transmission, but at low levels, and that's been suppressed very well. But as of just 6 days ago, we've now got Omicron circulating in New Zealand. So we obviously need to adapt to that. But the net effect so far is we've had around 16,000 cases and 52 deaths in the last 2 years from COVID-19.
Right. And Professor Baker, your daily infection rate still hover below 100 cases per day, right?
Yeah, well, look, we were down to 25 cases a day. That was Delta variant. But just as of today, we're back over 100, and most of them will be Omicron cases. Right. So we're expecting the numbers to rise very dramatically into the thousands over the next 2 to 3 months.
Right, which is why New Zealand currently is under a red alert in line with its COVID-19 traffic light setting, I understand. Could you tell us a bit about this alert arrangement?
Sure. I mean, that, as the name suggests, that's a three-tier system with red, orange, and green. And we've never been out of in the green zone at all, and the whole country's moved straight to the red zone.
Right. Professor Baker, speaking to local media there, you claim New Zealand needs to close its borders to high-risk countries to perhaps delay community transmissions. Could you tell us a bit more about your thoughts on this?
Well, at the moment, we're still managing our borders quite tightly, but we will actually change that approach once we have widespread Omicron transmission in New Zealand. That is the approach or the intervention that has kept us safe for 2 years. But it does come at a big price because a lot of people want to move across the borders and are currently restricted. So this is one of the reasons for relaxing these controls shortly.
Professor Baker, now, do share with us a bit about New Zealand's COVID-19 vaccination campaign and its role perhaps in keeping the pandemic at bay thus far.
Well, these current approaches work very efficiently at minimising the numbers in New Zealand. With the new approach, of course, the red light restrictions do limit gathering sizes, but the main thing they do is introduce a indoor vaccine mandate. So if you want to be indoors with other people, you have to be fully vaccinated. So the vaccine pass for that. And also restrictions on gathering size.
And Professor Baker, what has been the response, or the public response that is, to vaccinations in general over in New Zealand?
People have been very positive to vaccination. We've got around 90% of the population is now vaccinated. And we're rolling out boosters, which are around 25% at this point. And also the vaccination of children down to 5 years of age.
Right, and speaking about booster shots, Professor Baker, what are your thoughts on calls for additional vaccine shots, like a 4th dose or a second booster?
Well, I think we accept that, well, I should say the priority at the moment is to vaccinate or roll out boosters to the whole population. But in the future, it may be that that COVID-19 will behave like influenza, and we may need an annual booster shot, but we're certainly not planning on a 4th dose at the moment.
Right, and talking about COVID-19 behaving like the influenza, how do you respond, Professor Baker, to talk about Omicron perhaps slowly ushering in an endemic phase of COVID-19?
A lot depends on how we define endemic disease, because some people define it as no longer a problem. But many endemic diseases actually are still quite serious. And influenza, for example, is still responsible for 1 to 2% of deaths in many high-income countries. And we obviously want to minimize that. And in the past, diseases like smallpox were endemic. So a lot does come down to how we define that, what endemic means. It certainly, it won't be endemic, hopefully after the Omicron variant is contained around the world, but it will still be a problem that needs to be managed.
Right, and going back to Omicron, Professor Baker, Omicron has exhausted testing capacity of countries that are dealing with it. What can you tell us about the testing capacity of New Zealand?
Well, like many countries, we've relied very much on PCR testing and have built up a great capacity to do that. But the problem is that when Omicron becomes very intense, that PCR capacity won't be sufficient. So we will really need to switch to rapid antigen tests. They have not been used very much in New Zealand to date, partly because of the elimination approach. We've relied almost entirely on high-quality PCR testing.
Right, which has been the case here in South Korea as well. And before you go, Professor Baker, do tell us a bit about efforts by New Zealand to offer aid, that is, to Tonga as the latter continues to grapple with the aftermath of an underwater volcanic eruption.
Yeah, well, one of the challenges is that is not to introduce COVID-19 into these Pacific islands, because many have succeeded with an elimination strategy continually for 2 years now, and Tonga is one of them. So when there are shipments or aid is delivered by air and by sea, they use various approaches to prevent contact with local people, and they talk about a contactless approach for unloading ships and aircraft. Of course, all the crews are fully vaccinated and boosted and so on, but it is a risk, and we have seen transmission on Australian ships recently. So I think everyone's very conscious of preventing introduction of the virus.
Right, of course. Right then, Professor Baker, thank you very much for your thoughts and your time.
Great to talk. Thank you.